Hey guys, welcome to another episode of On Air with me, Owen Richards, and today I am joined with Adam Philpott. Adam is the CEO at Fingerprints and has been introduced to us by Josh Smith at CRO, who sadly can't be with us today owing to a bit of a family emergency. But Adam and I are going to crack on, do the best job we can do without Josh, and I'm sure we'll get some great insight out. Adam, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Owen. Thank you very much.
Looking forward to our discussion today. We're going to be talking about professionalising sales in SMB, which is a topic I'm really looking forward to getting into because I think there's a real challenge there for people. Obviously, you've had a say on what we're going to be talking about, and you're bringing some insight on that. Why are we talking about this? Why is it sort of a part of your journey, and why do you think it's important?
I mean, I think that, small companies have constraints and therefore they need to do things differently. I've been fortunate enough to work in very, very large companies, and I currently run a very small company. And I like that because it means I try different things as opposed to do the same thing over and over again. I'm all about building new experiences. But the word constraint really interests me too. You know, there's a phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that when you have constraints, you're forced to do things in innovative and different ways. But at the same time, when we come back to sales and professionalizing sales, even if you're a small company, there you can do things with the rigor, discipline, talent, processes, and tools more now than ever than you can at a large company as well. So I think, there's lots of opportunities to do great things within a small context.
Right, some fantastic points already. Before we get tucked into the topic itself, just give us an overview of yourself, your career, what's led you to where you are now, and a bit about the role now and the business as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, very good. I mean, I when I left university, I had a failed business it was in streetwear. I'm not going to talk much more about that, but I quickly found myself after university in technology and sales. I just fell into it like many people do. There's no preordained or predestined path, and there was definitely no thought. I just ended up there, and that was in distribution here in the UK, in sales. I remember at that time you'd have a daily forecast. You go up to the whiteboard, you put your number on the board. Yep. That's what I'm going to say. It's daily, man. Daily forecast. So cool. And so I did that for a few years, and then I wanted more. I wanted to have a broader value proposition. I wanted to engage with end clients as well, because as I said a moment ago, I'm really big on building experiences. And so during that time in distribution, which is probably about two or so, maybe 3 years, I moved from just sales into sales management. I was quite young. I was like 26, 27. And so I was running the Cisco business unit for a distie here in the UK. I quit. I wanted to do something else. And I moved to Australia on a one-way ticket. I was backpacking. I ended up looking around and decided I wanted to stay there. And so I ended up finding a job working for Cisco when I was in Australia. And it was like, I was on a backpacker visa, so I could only work for 3 months in one place. And B, to do that, I then got the lowest job available, which was getting leads for inside sales. I thought inside sales was the lowest role in sales, the most junior role. I ended up underneath that getting leads for them. And so, but I loved it, I love phone sales at the time. I loved the fact that it's challenging because you kind of only got this, you don't have this, back then you didn't anyway. Video wasn't really a big thing then. That was 2002. And so I ended up, working at Cisco. I did well. They liked me. They took me on, sponsored me and all of that. And so I ended up, moving up the food chain, shall we say, in seniority, and until 2010 when I was running their commercial business, which is their mid-market team across ANZ. So, lots of movement upwards, ended up becoming a citizen, etc. And then I wanted to continue to evolve. So I moved with Cisco to Singapore. I was in Singapore for 3 years, and I ran the nascent business development for security as the company was getting into that. Liked it there, but then I repatriated myself back to the UK in 2013 to run the EMEA cybersecurity business for Cisco. So did that, Then I went to McAfee at the end of my Cisco career. I've been there a long time. I didn't want to get, be considered just a Cisco guy. Oh, he's a good guy, but he's a Cisco. Do you know what I mean? I wanted to show that I could take the skills I'd learned and apply them somewhere else. So I went to McAfee and did exactly that, where I was responsible for the whole business because it was a pure cyber business as opposed to being overlay as I was at Cisco. So interesting change. We'll probably talk about playbooks as we go today, because that's a really interesting concept that appeals to me. Private equity owned at that time as well, owned by TPG. So around that, drove a lot of change there, particularly as it relates to operationalizing sales. Slightly higher scale role. It was 400 or 500 people there, and ended up evolving that business. We flipped it. It IPO'd. And then it got the enterprise piece got bought by another private equity company, and I became the CRO at that time. So I was running, it was about 1,200 staff, about a $1.8 billion ARR book of business, and did that for a few years. And then at my 100th quarter end, I decided I would go and do something different, and I've completely changed. And I joined this small company to drive transformation as the CEO, which is where I am today.
What a journey. That's really interesting. That kind of step into an organization that large to then step into a small business. It's usually, people do it the other way around, don't they? So it's fascinating to hear, maybe as we go through this, some of your drivers and reasons for wanting to take on that challenge, because it is different. It is a challenge. Maybe we could start with looking at kind of what you have seen as the big differences as around sort of sales in your Cisco McAfee world, which is that kind of large business, very very systematized, very process driven, I would imagine, versus stepping into a small co where, with all due respect, it's probably not quite like that. Maybe it should be. What have you seen as the big differences stepping into a smaller organization and seeing the state of the sales org, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I would say certainly as you're in larger companies, there's much more of a machine about it in many ways. Of course, it has this inertia, this momentum, the cogs are all turning, right? And there's a level of momentum that comes with a big company, a mass, where it's kind of hard to slow it down, but it can equally be hard to speed it up as well. So there's disadvantages to that machinery. The other thing I would say about a large company is, just as I share that, that vision of it being a set of cogs. One thing you don't know in a large company is which cogs are doing the turning and which cogs are being turned. Do you know what I mean? Who's really exerting the effort and the energy, and who just appears to be turning, but they're not, but they're just going with the flow, So there's disadvantages to those big companies, of course, as well. As I look at the smaller company, I wrote this phrase down, the coalition of the willing. You've just got these guys just working hard, men and women working hard, sometimes a bit of a motley crew, very individual based as well. That, what I find is that there's people who've been successful in the past, and then look to replicate that, which is obviously great. But success is very individualized. And so I think there's an opportunity for having great entrepreneurial people, because you need that in a small company, is people who've got great ideas and can go out and envision them and engage and make them happen, but also a level of platform and structure and operational discipline to support them as well. So I think, it's combining best of both, so that you have that agility. You do need great people with great ideas, almost like sole traders who go out there like they are the company to try things, but at the same time have a level of rigor and discipline underneath that. Not too much that it suffocates them, but not too little where everybody's off and nobody knows what's going on. So I think that, there's a blended opportunity there.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because those that are successful in SMB would look at an enterprise environment and say, my style is going to get really suppressed there. My ability to sell in my way, I've got to follow a set process. And those in enterprise would likely look at an SME and go, how on earth do you know what's happening in that organization? How do you get to the point where you can scale that when everyone's doing something their own way completely differently? And I guess there is a right and a wrong to a certain degree because you're working towards your environment. But I guess the question is, how do you get the best of both worlds, where you allow people to be individual, to play to their strengths and their style, but you can replicate that, and you can replicate the things that work, but suppress the things that maybe don't.
I mean, I think that's a fundamental talent management philosophy, right? Like I've always applied, I think, to be a CRO or to run sales, or as frankly as a CEO as I am now, you need a level of rigor and discipline. But I'm a big believer in balance. If you have too much of something, it's bad. If you have too little of something, it's bad. And the same is true of operational rigor, because what we need to do is hire good people who are great at what you need them to do. And I mean, this all sounds really obvious and basic, but then to give them an operating framework that's not so narrow that they can't use their skills, but not so wide that they can use them wherever they want, and it may not be in the direction that you're pursuing as an organization. And so for me, operational rigor is about giving a framework, but one that's neither too wide nor too narrow, that allows for flexibility within it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it, actually, that we want people to express themselves. We want people to be creative, because sometimes people doing things that are not the same as everybody else is how we find the new way of doing things that is better, and how we improve, and how we get people to feel ownership of the process and input and involvement, versus being a cog, which I think you can have such a negative impact.
I mean, you're absolutely right. It's, being right doesn't matter. Like, if someone's not bought into what you're trying to do, then they're not going to do it, or at least you're not going to get a great result. You might get an okay result. You probably won't even get a result. But the other thing we need to think about is, like, what's the quid pro quo? These are people who have their own careers, who want to grow. And even if they don't want to grow, most people do, but even if they don't, they want to be entertained. They want to enjoy what they do. And therefore, giving them things that, or allowing them to enjoy their work, I think is also a part of it too. So if you can find that balance between achieving an outcome and someone who's growing and enjoying what they're doing, I mean, that's really the panacea that we're seeking.
We're talking about professionalizing sales in SMB. I guess it might be good to stand back and just define what we mean by that. As in, what are the elements of a professionalized sales organization or sales department? What are the basics that you're looking for in there? And let's say you're walking in and it's completely not there. Where are you starting? And what are the things that you're looking to build in to make sure you do get that?
It's interesting you use the word basic, actually, because I think of it as basic, better, best, or good, better, best is probably a better way to put it. Because basic's a little bit lightweight. And so as I think about it, the basics are the minimum platform that you need, the minimum safety net that you need to run a business is kind of those basics around just good pipeline discipline. That includes forecasting. So basically, the way I think about my pipeline is it should be a reflection of what's really happening out there commercially for my business. And that doesn't mean that there's deals that aren't in there because people are hiding them, or even deals that they're not so sure about because they're a conservative salesperson that they don't want to put it in until they've got until they've got a signature on it.
All right, no, you're fine.
I swear a little bit. That's the first one, not too bad.
Well, you're getting passionate.
We'll probably get three. I get excited. So I think managing the pipeline is basic, right? And as I said, it's a reflection on what's going on out there. But that takes a bit of work to get to. There's a bit of trust that needs to be, can I show that? Oh, it's Q4. I don't want to show it because I'm going to get gold on it for next year. All that stuff. So create an environment where people feel comfortable putting their forecast in, and they're not berated if something's best case and it doesn't book in 2 weeks. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think just getting that teamwork and camaraderie working, but of course also the forecast, that there's good discipline around what pipe cover do I need for a given quarter or for a year, how mature should that be, what does commit mean, how much of a commitment is that, is it signed in blood, etc. So ensuring that those rules are not only in place, but the trust is in place and the teamwork is in place, that people feel comfortable to go and execute in that way. So that for me is basic. Better is when you start to then evolve your sales methodology. And I've used lots of different sales methodologies, from very basic ones all the way up to things like MedPick. And it's having the right one for your company as well. If you've got massive deals that are highly complex with many stakeholders, then something like MedPick may make sense. Yeah. If you don't, then something perhaps more basic, like awareness, interest, decision, action, just basic stuff like that is perfectly fine. But then to instantiate that in the CRM tools that you're using, I like to ensure that I'm kind of tracking those stages, and I look at the timing stage and things like that, so that we can see when we review deals, what can we do to accelerate from one stage to the next? Is something getting stuck? So I think a sales methodology is kind of then on top of that basic discipline to make it better. And then best is around prospecting methodology. I don't think I've spoken to a single sales leader who hasn't said to me, yeah, I really need to move my reps from farmers to hunters. I mean, I've been hearing it for like a few years now. Everybody's saying, yeah, I really need to do that. So like everyone feels that they've got farmers. So I also think that's tied up in what's happening with customer success too, but that's maybe a topic for another day. But prospecting methodology for me is it starts to shift you left, right? If we don't just focus on revenue, we do focus on pipeline, because pipeline gets you to revenue, but we need to shift left and think about, well, what are we doing to get to pipeline? And so of course I'm thinking about then leads, and I'm thinking about activities. Activities drive leads, leads drive pipeline, pipeline drives revenue, right? And so that's kind of how I think about the flow. So shifting left, and it doesn't mean micromanaging people. How many meetings have you done? Blah, blah, blah. But it is about understanding who we're targeting, what stage are we at, what's happening from our marketing engine to generate leads, etc., so that we have a more fulsome view on getting to that revenue, that profitable revenue outcome. So that for me is best.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's nice to hear you talk about that full journey from the beginning to end. Because I see a lot of sales leaders focusing on your first point there, which is I need to understand the forecast. What they don't do is roll their sleeves up and get into the bit that goes before that, and they think, that sits with marketing or whatever it might be. And ultimately, with a CEO hat, that's absolutely the right thing. But a CRO hat, even a VP, I would be expecting or wanting to see them really understanding that full journey and understanding that actually, yes, we want quality of activity. We also need a minimum standard quantity of activity to drive pipeline in the first place. And it's an expectation that we have both of those things. I guess that the forecast discipline is an interesting one. I'd like to just sit up for a moment, because that culture piece is really important, isn't it? Because you already highlighted that you can say to people as many times as you like, give me best case, like give me the real case, give me the best guess. But there's so many influencing factors: self-preservation, salesperson's optimism, end of quarter sandbagging to the next quarter, commission plans, all those sorts of things that have an influence. How do you cut through that so you can get a sensible view on it? And I guess as a second part of that question, what are the bits of insight or maybe data that you're looking at to make sure that you're getting the most accurate view on pipeline, because it is so critical?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not an exact science, I wouldn't say, but it is scientific. I think a couple of things can help. Number one, you don't expect absolute perfection from everybody. The world just doesn't work in that way. I think even if you're a small company, there's the relative law of large numbers. Well, if I've got this deal and this deal, at least I can hedge across them to predict an outcome. And so I think hedging is is important. Or another way of thinking about hedging is triangulating. I have a number of different deals, therefore I'm not going to assume a maximum outcome, but I'll assume a balanced outcome across them. Of course, then the individual deals themselves matter. There's a run rate to look at. Of course, if they're large needle mover deals, that requires a bit more detail and insight as to the likelihood of that closing, close plans, understanding the procurement process, etc. So, I think you dig in deeper to the bigger deals and make a call on it. And then, of course, you kind of hedge across the run rate business too. But an interesting thing I think you touched on was around the data that's available. Given the topic we're talking about is professionalizing sales. I talked about my journey, and when I was in inside sales, it was cold calling. Back in the day, I mean, that's what it was. The world has changed. There are different tools. Like, people make buying decisions in different ways. They research digitally before they'll talk to somebody. But equally, there are tools available to help you understand, who may be in a buying journey, whether it's through, what their behavior is on the internet, or whether it's just using data to know that they may be in a buying journey. So I think there's some really useful tools to help you understand who would be a good prospect. But there are also those tools, coming back to this topic of forecasting, to tell you, whether your deal is solid. I'll give you some good examples. I think, I used to use Clary, for example, as a forecasting tool. And like many tools today, Pipedrive and others, they integrate with Outlook for your email and calendar. And so you have behavioral information to tell you, have we engaged sufficiently with this customer? Yeah. Is it really at that stage? There are many, many digital tools out there to underpin sales, which I really like, because it makes it means you're getting the activity you want from your sales guys, not them burning 50% of their time doing administration, right? And so I think these sorts of tools can help ruggedize a forecast too. But there's always going to need to be a mathematical oversight with field information to help you make a call on that. And the final thing I'll say on this, quite a long answer. Final thing I'll say on this is that, for me, forecasting isn't about reading the news; it's about creating the news. A forecast isn't there to say, well, where are you going to finish? No, a forecast is there to say, look, I'm going to finish here. How can I finish better? Well, if I was to get these few deals in, this is, you're not always successful, but that's what the game in town is to optimize and maximize the outcome, not simply predict it accurately.
And I guess there's other parts of the organization that can really contribute to this journey, right? So it's one thing as a CEO looking in and saying, well, how can I affect change here? But obviously, marketing have a role in helping to professionalize the sales process, and I'm sure operational people, particularly around technology and implementing technology now, we've gone through that journey of having people specifically in our business who are employed to help us implement and utilize technology in the right way, because we see that the gains that are got from that. But 10 years ago, if you said that, would have been thrown off the table, I guess, as a conversation. So what are the other departments that you're looking at to support with that journey of professionalizing sales, and how are they contributing?
Well, I mean, again, it's a small company. I don't have this kind of rich infrastructure of support, and I think that's kind of, I like that, because it means that you can be more agile, more empowered to do different things, right? What it does mean, though, is that you do a wider array of tasks than you otherwise might in a large company. But the people I lean on my CTO, because he brings a lot of insight around technology, particularly around AI. I lean on my CFO, because he's also very forward-leaning in terms of, don't just hire more people, use more tools to make the people more productive. He's very, very leaning in, very forward-facing, avant-garde on doing exactly that. He's also a power user of AI tools outside of sales as well. So I lean on those guys, and then of course, as a secondary tier, I'll lean on IT, who roll up under the CTO. To help us get this stuff done. I mean, we're just rolling out a new CRM at the moment. I'm just getting it spun up last night. I'm asking them to integrate it into Outlook, and they're doing all of those things. So, that way it's not just me kind of banging the drum on what I want, but working with a team to ensure that it's not random acts of kind of departmental violence, even though I kind of run the whole thing. I have my CRO hat on here, but it integrates into a broader stack because, of course, we want it to integrate into our financial back end, for example. So, it has to be kind of, it takes a village, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things about how do you get tools and technology right in a business, because it can be an absolute enabler and game changer for you, but it can also be a distraction. And you see a lot of people getting so hell-bent on the fact that they need to be implementing technology that they end up with a tech stack that's got 40 things in it. No one really knows how to get the best out of any of them, and they're getting in the way of progress rather than enabling it.
It's a really interesting point. I mean, I think the advantage of being a small company is we can light stuff up and tear it down quite quickly. Now, I don't want to be flip-flopping too much, but at the same time, I'm okay to try tools, right?
Yep.
With things like CRM will stick, although we have already twisted on one, because we didn't have one when I joined. We implemented something pretty basic, and now we're kind of flipping it to something better. But I think about AI, for example. There's loads of tools out there, and what I'm finding with AI is different tools work for different people. So there's almost this need to have flexibility in this. That doesn't mean that everybody picks their own adventure. I mean, that's not going to scale in a tech stack, but there is some flexibility you can allow for people to use different tools in different ways, depending on how they like to operate. So, there's this choice element, which is a really interesting evolving space for tech, so that people can do their job in their way.
Yeah, I nearly said it then. I'm worried for you for CRM if you're going basic, better, and then you're going to need to go best there, because you said you started with a basic.
We won't flip again. I said to the team, I don't see CRM as basic, better, best. It may be, the features that we consume within the next platform move us from better to best, but we're not going to keep. We won't flip our.
You're going to have to change again.
Yeah, it'd be too hard.
It is, it's a real mission. So going back to culture for a second. So I guess what are you doing in the business now, or what would you recommend people do to I guess communicate how we're on that journey, the stages we're at, where we're going, making sure that people are on the journey with you around best practice and professionalizing, because it is something you have to do consciously. You can't just go into an organization or start a business and say, right, we're going on this journey in your head, and not communicate that, because people won't understand where you're going, and that really helps them to buy in. And also, you haven't got all of the best ideas, whatever your role and title. Other people can bring ideas to the table and say, hang on, how about we think about this, and we could be doing that, and that would really support us. So what are you doing to make sure that people buy into that sort of professionalizing of culture, professionalizing of process, and how are you communicating that?
Yeah, I think, this is change management. And so communication is probably the most important thing. And again, let's come back to the advantages that small companies have. Every 2 weeks, I do an all hands with everybody in the company, every 2 weeks, because what I want is not, a town hall, executive presentation, but I want a conversation with the team. And so, I'll do a bit at the beginning to say, look, here's what's going on, and to kind of help them understand where we're going as a team. But I'll bring loads of other people in to come and talk about what have they been doing. We've got one of our engineers is in New York meeting customers this week. Next week, I'll ask him to come and talk about what he's done there. Last week we talked about some deals that we've won, and actually we talked about some deals that we're bidding for as a competitive displacement. Because I think sometimes there's this desire to wait till the end to communicate something, but I think I'd rather communicate something 4 times throughout its journey, even if it doesn't manifest in a win, than wait till the end, because otherwise you feel like you're constantly waiting, and when you get there, you're already on to the next thing and you forget to communicate. So I think, timely, for me, it's about, I think about the daylight. My job is to think about where we're going as a company and move us there. And the actions I take on a weekly basis are to help us do that. other people's job is to execute today for tomorrow. And so what I don't want to do is there's too much daylight between me and them. And so I need to communicate so that they understand where we are. So I'll communicate around basic. Then I'll keep pushing them towards better. Then I'll keep pushing them towards best. You know, it's a constant growth journey, constant evolution, but it requires a lot of communication. It also requires the right talent base to be able to do that. You know, there's a phrase, change the people or change the people. You know, and so it's about ensuring that we've got the right people who can evolve and have got ceiling to grow into ahead of them as we change as a company. So there's a piece around people there too. And there's, of course, a piece around technology. Have we got the right tools in place to help them go and do that also? So I kind of think about the old adage, people, process, and technology is, I think, about driving change.
And we obviously discussed this conversation before we went live, and one of the things that you commented was about staying scrappy and doing the difficult things. Maybe you just elaborate on what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think, you know, I looked at when I came in, we had a set of values that we have as a company, and I felt that they'd been in place for a long time, and they weren't really helping us. And so myself and the leadership team, with conversations with all of our staff, put in place behaviors instead. And we looked at behaviors for the company. We didn't come up with scrappy as one of them, but we came up with this notion of grit. Because you need to, as an individual contributor, you need to be resilient, determined, you need to keep trying, you know, because there isn't this kind of army behind you to come and do it for you or with you. You know, there are people who can come and help you do, you know, get things done together, but it requires you being scrappy, you know, like stick to the idea. If you've got an idea and you think it's great and you think there's a prospect you can benefit from it, keep trying at it. You know, like there's this notion in startups of the pivot. You have this amazing idea, you have this great product, but when you take it to market, oh, it's not wanted here, but it's wanted over there. So you pivot, you know, and this grit is about being determined to continue to follow through, find out where that pivot is to create successful value with a client. So, you know, I need people who are scrappy and can do that. Doesn't mean they're not professional, you know, scrappy might sound like that, but it's kind of entrepreneurial, gritty, dynamic, you know, empowered, but ultimately customer centric.
I really like that point. So as somebody who's worked my entire career in building startups and small businesses and scaling them, I've never worked in an enterprise business. Lots of clients and understand it, but I've never worked in it. And I think this is one of the most important points for me as takeaway from this conversation, is how you're successful in small business. Because and apologies if you don't like sport, but I tend to use a lot of analogies that take me down the sporting line. But it's a bit like, you know, putting the most skillful footballer on a you know, national league pitch when everybody's hacking your ankles on a Tuesday night in Stoke, they say, and all that kind of stuff, where it's actually, that doesn't work down there. You can't play that way down there. And it's kind of the same. I see so many people move out of enterprise, and kudos to you for being able to do this. And they go into a small business and they say, well, where are all the people to do this stuff for me? Well, guess what? They don't exist. You've got to do it yourself down here. And you see people not doing it. I think you've kind of, you've epitomized that already in two ways. One is, you know, you've gone in, you've changed the CRM twice. That's scrappy, right? That's stuff that to do that in enterprise just would not have the agility to do it. The other is, you mentioned, we try tools and we gear them up, and then we take them out if they're not working, and you do that quickly. And again, I mean, it would take you 6 months to buy it in enterprise, let alone test it and then get rid of it and go on to the next one. And I really see that as a bit of a superpower when you're in SMBs, that you say, it doesn't remove professionalism or finesse or quality, but can you be scrappy, make quick decisions, fail fast, move on to the next thing, and roll your sleeves up and get things done.
And I'll tell you, one thing I mentioned at the very beginning is I said, maybe we'll talk about playbooks, you know, and maybe that brings me back to that, you know. I didn't know if we would, but great that we are, because everybody talks about playbooks, right? I was in private equity for 7 years, you know, they all talk about their playbook, and everybody talks about, but I'll tell you this, a lot of people think that they've got a playbook, they've got a page, you know, because they've done the same thing. right? And so they've got one way of solving things. A playbook is about how you have multiple pages through multiple experience, and a bit like in sales, you diagnose before you prescribe. What's the problem?
Yep.
Okay, let me find the right page. Oh, this one works. Sometimes you don't have a page, so you write a new one because you've got a different situation, but you're building out your playbook for future situations that match that, you know. And so I think what this is about is not saying, well, I've worked for IBM, no offense to IBM, you know, I've worked for a big company, therefore I know what success looks like. No. Like I've seen these situations, and I know, you know, that this has worked for me, but I'm not going to be so dogged to say, well, that was 20 years ago, that'll still work. I can apply the framework of that page, but I can also evolve it. Or I've never seen this before. Let's figure out how to fill out that page in that playbook too. And I think that's kind of what's interesting, is building out, you know, a tome over time. But even then, the pages get out of date and need refreshing.
Yeah, and you know what? I think documenting that as you go and seeing it as a journey and an evolution is really key, right? It's about, can we have a playbook or a page or a number of pages that are there, but can we make sure we keep them up to date as we learn? So it's not a
I wish I did document it. Unfortunately, I don't. It's a kind of mental construct of a playbook. But that's experience, though, isn't it? You know, I was talking to a mentor of mine recently, the CHRO at my former company, and he asked me how I was getting on in his new role. I said, look, you know, I'm getting loads of experience. I just don't know what. And he said, that's because you haven't had to reapply it yet. When you reapply it, then you'll know you've got the experience. And I think, you know, I don't document playbooks, but we remember them because they, you know, they're constructs and easy to recall.
Yeah, good point. And then I guess final point from me, and by all means, if there's other things you want to bring to the table, do so. The world is different to what it was maybe 5-10 years ago in building out a sales org, and obviously remote working represents both an opportunity and in some ways a disadvantage and a challenge. So, you know, what are you seeing in there? What are you doing to make sure that you keep people connected to that journey of professionalizing the sales org? Just keen to get your take on how that's having an influence, both positively and negatively, on the journey.
Yeah, I think like anything, it brings benefits and it has disadvantages too. And like, again, that playbook thing, right? So we've got a new situation that we need to figure out what works for us, right? And fundamentally, I like flexibility. You know, I don't need people commuting to an office when their customer is somewhere else. But I think in sales, we've had that remote working mindset for some time for that reason. Like, don't come here. If you're in my office, what are you doing? Admin? That you're not making me any money or creating any value by doing that. Be out there, right, seeing customers. It doesn't mean they never come in, but you know. So I think we've had that notion for some time in sales, but I think what we've seen recently, as we've seen an acceleration towards remote working, is new ways of doing things. You know, so new tools, new digital tools, you know, lots of ways of augmenting human capacity by offloading some of the stuff that's maybe lower value, repetitive, or so driving efficiency using tools, or making people more effective, right, by giving them tools to be better at targeting, or tools that help them have better sales meetings or better phone calls with customers. There's some really good tools out there to just make them more effective as well as more efficient. So I think harnessing those new ways of doing things rather than being stuck in the past. Well, in my day, it was shoe leather, you know, like, I think that's really important. I do think there are, of course, disadvantages: camaraderie, community, knowledge sharing, particularly for earlier in careers. One thing I've noticed is a sense of isolation, not so much in sales, because those people are out seeing their clients, but isolation still in sales from the business. And so one thing I've had to do quite recently, actually, is I moved away from having really structured one-on-ones. I used to do that in a big company because I had so many staff and I had to have that rigor. Small company, much more organic. I talk to people all the time. But I find that with remote people, I've had to put one-on-ones back in, not because I wasn't talking to them, but because we were talking in a very task-oriented way, not a very human way. And so having time set aside to chit-chat. What's going on? Oh, let me tell you about this. What's happening here? And, you know, how's things, you know, and you just chat about more human things. I think those are things that are helpful. I do think things like offsites become important. Getting people out and together is important within one's fiscal means. So I think, you know, it's kind of thinking about how you get balance across that to negate some of those disadvantages, but to capitalize on the benefits.
Really good points. And anything else you wanted to add, or you think would be useful for our audience in and around this topic?
No, I mean, I think, you know, just to kind of summarize what we've covered, I do think in a structured way, even though I run a small company which is more agile, I still think in a structured way. And that kind of, you know, good, better, best is a nice way of thinking about it. I think the blend of people, process, and technology is super important in sales. You know, have you got the right people? Are you managing them in the right way to get the most from them? Do you have the right processes in place that aren't too, you know, confining, but equally aren't too broad? And then are you using technology to evolve how you do things in a thoughtful, but also experimental way sometimes too? And if you bring that kind of holy trinity together in a kind of consistent way, I think there's lots of advantages to be had there.
Fantastic. Well, Adam, thank you so much. I think really enjoyed hearing from hearing about your experiences and hearing what you're doing there. If people want to get in touch with you, maybe they've got some questions, maybe they want to get some more gold out of your brain. How are they best to get in touch with you? What's the best way to reach out to you?
Probably LinkedIn. Unless you've already got my contact details, you can just contact me directly. LinkedIn. I don't know what LinkedIn gives you in terms of mobile numbers and stuff like that. You can send me a WhatsApp as well if you have my details. And you know what? Like, I love kind of knowledge sharing as well. I'm happy to share my knowledge, but it's a kind of, you know, I always learn something from questions as well as from discussion. You know, I don't believe I know everything. My playbook will never be complete. It's constantly evolving, and so those conversations help with that too.
Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. And Josh, for what it's worth, we missed you. We'll have to get you back on for the next one. But Adam, in the meantime, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your experience. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.